I have always felt that my students should be able to leave their first lesson with either the ability to play some beats, or at least an understanding of what they need to work on in order to play those beats. Technique and fundamentals are super important, and I will take you on some seriously deep dives covering all of that. But this first lesson is all about understanding the information on the page and transferring it to your limbs, or in other words, reading and coordination, so that we can get you on that drum set. So, let's learn how to play some drums. The first thing we're going to be dealing with are beats made up of quarter notes. Quarter notes are a type of note that gets one beat, and you can identify them by the stem that goes straight up the right side of a notation or straight down the left side of a notation. In this example, our notation is a filled-in dot, and the stem is going straight up the right side of that dot. So on this line, we have 4 quarter notes, and each one of those quarter notes gets one beat. So if I were to clap the quarter notes while counting them out loud, it would go like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now do it with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. You just clapped 4 quarter notes while also counting those quarter notes out loud. So now let's talk about putting this on the drum set. For those of you who do not know the names of the different parts of the kit, let's run through that real quick. This drum in between my legs is called the snare drum, and the drum on the floor that I play with my right foot is called the bass drum, also known as a kick drum. These drums are called toms, and more specifically, this one is called a rack tom because it's above the bass drum like it's on a rack, and this one is called a floor tom because it's on the floor. It's very common to have 2 rack toms set up, but my kit just has 1 right now. All of these are cymbals, but if we were to get more specific, this right here is called the hi-hat. It can be played with my hands and with my left foot. My left foot can also affect the sound I get by keeping the cymbals pressed together when I hit them or letting them be apart when I hit them. This cymbal is called a crash cymbal. And this cymbal is called a ride cymbal, and as far as standard kits go, that covers it for now. For the quarter note beats that we're about to play, and actually all of the beats we'll be playing in this lesson, we're only going to be dealing with the snare, bass drum, and hi-hat. So let's learn how to identify each one of those on the music. The X sitting on top of the top line is the hi-hat. So every time you see that, I want you to play it with your right hand if you're right-handed, and if you're left-handed, you can play it with your left hand. The filled-in dot on the bottom space is your bass drum, so every time you see that, I want you to play it by stomping your foot on the pedal as if you were stomping flat-footed on the ground, like this. The filled-in dot on the second space from the top is your snare drum, so whenever you see that, the hand that is not playing the hi-hat will play the snare. So if your right hand is on the hi-hat, your left hand will be crossed underneath it to play the snare, and if your left hand is playing the hi-hat, your right hand will play the snare. So, looking at this first line, we can see that every note on here is a quarter note because they all have lines going straight up. We can also see that some of the quarter notes are stacked on top of each other, which means that we're going to play both of those notes at the same time. So on beat 1, we're going to play the hi-hat and the bass drum together. On beat 2, we're just going to play the hi-hat. On beat 3, we're going to play the hi-hat and snare drum together. And on beat 4, we're just going to play the hi-hat again. And that's our first beat. This sheet is all about getting you used to seeing the beats written down and transferring that information onto the drums. And it's also about getting your body used to the coordination needed to play the beats. Our bodies come somewhat pre-programmed with things our limbs are already comfortable doing and things they absolutely do not want to do. And as we learn to play, it's our job to break down that programming so that instead of relying on what our limbs want to do, we're making our limbs do what our brain is telling them to do. The best way to make this happen is to start out slow so that you have time to process what you're seeing and then time to transfer that information to the different parts of your body that need to play. Counting out loud is also really important because it lets you know where you are within the beat. Notice that I said counting out loud. That means with your voice at a normal talking volume. Whispering under your breath or counting in your head doesn't count, pun intended, because the counts become a background task that you aren't really paying attention to. But when you count out loud and you put it out there, it makes you focus much more on what you're doing and you'll be able to catch and fix mistakes. It takes a little bit of practice at first because your voice is like using another limb, but if you practice it, it will get easier. Now with that being said, I can't make you count out loud, but I am telling you now, you will be in a much better place if you do. Start out by just trying to get through each beat once, but as you get comfortable with it, try to repeat each one at least 4 times in a row without stopping so that you can develop a flow with it. Looking at line 1 again, we have a hi-hat on every beat, a bass drum with the hi-hat on beat 1, and a snare drum with the hi-hat on beat 3. Slowly, that's going to sound like this. And when we play it a little bit faster, it sounds like this. Line 2 is exactly the same as line 1, except we're going to add another bass drum with the hi-hat on beat 2, and that will sound like this. And faster, it sounds like this. Before I go to line 3, if you get what's happening, feel free to go through the rest of these at your own pace. All I'll be doing for the rest of this video is demonstrating each beat. So if you don't need that, I'll see you in the next video. And for those of you that would like to see and hear the beats, let's move on to line 3. Just like the last 2 beats, and for everything we're going to be playing in this video, our hi-hat will be playing on every count. Our snare will again be on beat 3, but that second bass drum has now moved over to beat 4, which means that if you're looping this, you need to be ready for that bass drum coming on beat 1 immediately after beat 4. Slowly, it sounds like this. Faster, it sounds like this. Now, for line 4, we're going to be getting into a funny feeling bit of coordination. The hi-hat is again on every beat, with our snare drum on 3, but that second bass drum is now also on beat 3, which means that we're going to be playing our hi-hat, snare drum, and bass drum all at the same time. This usually feels weird at first, but the more you do it, the more normal it will become. Slowly. And faster. Line 5 also has us playing all 3 limbs together on beat 3, but this one is a little easier because it also has us playing a bass drum on the rest of the counts, which means that our hi-hat and bass drum are playing together for every beat. If we can autopilot that, all we need to focus on is adding the snare drum on beat 3. And a little bit faster. Line 6 takes what we did in line 5, but removes the bass drum on beat 3 now, which can make this a little more challenging. We have to be able to control our leg so that after we stomp on beat 2, we leave our leg down and don't immediately bring it up again and get caught holding it in the air while our hands play by themselves on 3. We want to take advantage of this break and rest our leg through the entire space. So make sure you start out slowly and try to feel the weight of your leg with each stomp. Don't trampoline your foot off of the pedal each time you play, because if you do, you will get caught holding your leg in the air. Slowly, line 6 will sound like this.
3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4.
And faster, it will sound like this. Up to this point, our snare drum has been on beat 3 every time, but the last 2 lines are going to change that. For these 2, the snare will now be on beats 2 and 4, while the hi-hat continues to play on all 4 beats, and our bass drum just plays on 1. It goes like this.
3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And faster, it goes like this.
3, 4, 1.
For the last line, we're keeping everything we did in line 7, but we're adding another bass drum to beat 3. Slowly.
3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And faster.
3, 4, 1.
If this quarter note sheet was easy for you, then great. Your coordination and reading are at a level where you can forget this page and focus on the rest of the things coming up in this course. If it wasn't easy for you though, that's also fine. There's no rush here. Take your time with it until you start building familiarity with the beats. Feel free to move on to the next video either way, and then work your way through everything at your own pace. See you in the next video.